I really need your help, but I have no money. Can you help me? And as I read that message, I actually started to cry. And the crying turned into sobbing. And then the sobbing turned into this realization of, oh my God, I completely let this guy down.
Alrighty guys, we got a very special guest back in here again today. This man, one of the top business and peak performance coaches here in Australia, coming back for round 3, Mr. Kerwin Rae.
If I knew I could help someone, then I was going to use whatever was within my moral and ethical toolbox.
You even had a gun put at your head.
Oh mate, you just struck something big.
You're held at gunpoint by a terrorist.
And so I start smiling. And then the dude who's got the AK in my face, he sees me smile and he gets our goal when we comfort a child, the same goal we have when we comfort a team member. Because if you have a team member that's, melting down, you're not going to scream at them, you're not going to yell at them, you're not going to dominate them, although some leaders will.
Alrighty guys, welcome back to the Dream Out Loud podcast. We got a very special guest back in here again today. So this man, one of the top business and peak performance coaches here in Australia, coming back for round 3, Mr. Kerwin Rae.
Thank you, brother. It's good to be here.
Mate, I'm very excited to chat to you again every single time we chat. Not only do we have mad chats, but the episode just goes off.
Nice.
Like my audience love your savageness. And it's been so cool because the first one we did together was a couple of years ago. It was before you had that mad stroke. And then the last one was literally just after.
Not long after, yeah.
And so it'd be really cool for the people to see, like, you're looking in tip-top shape now, mate. You've definitely had a really great
well, I actually I crashed after that last podcast.
Yeah, I remember you nearly didn't do it.
I did it, and then because I thought I was on the comeback, but then I crashed pretty hard after.
So it was
that.
me.
It's all you, Morgan.
All right, cool. Well, I want to ask you a question. Well, I want to ask you many actually, but I want to kick it off with what is leadership to you?
Oh, straight into the thick of it. That's a big question, and I think I'm going to answer it as I answer most things in tangents. I think leadership is a very broad concept. I think it's something that is present in everyday life. As a mammal, as mammals, we live in a social hierarchy, as do all mammals, which means that there is a constant exchange within that hierarchy, which essentially, in many ways, can be characterized as a leadership hierarchy. You're either being led or you're being followed in some way, shape, or form. So leadership to me is it's a constant. I think it's something that doesn't escape. I think it's something that doesn't have a pause button, because oftentimes we lead in relationships. We lead, whether it be intimate relationships or friendships. When it comes to being a parent, we're constantly in a leadership position that doesn't get switched off, and especially in a business. And so to me, leadership is really a very two-parter. First part, I think we've got conscious leadership and unconscious leadership. If we look at conscious leadership, it's a set of behaviors that are very visible, that create an example and almost set the benchmark of an expectation for people who are around you to follow. So to me, leadership is not theoretical, although theory can be very helpful. Leadership is really the demonstration of very visible behaviors that are demonstrated in a way that inspire others to want to participate in that expression. So yeah, I think we could go broader and deeper, but that's in a nutshell. I'll try and keep it simple.
Yeah. What makes a bad leader?
I'd probably say a lack of self-awareness, aggression, domination, control, agenda. Because oftentimes people think they're leading because oftentimes people are leading because they want something versus trying to do something. Masaru Emoto does some incredible work. I don't know if you've read it.
The guy who did the water thing?
Yeah, and he's got 2 photos of 2 different crystals, but very similar. And one crystal is do it, and the other crystal is let's do it. And what's interesting is the crystal for do it looks almost like the crystal for the crystalline formation for Satan. So it looks like this evil eye. Whereas the crystal for let's do it, is very close to the love and gratitude crystal. And so for me, when you look at do it symbolizes control, whereas let's do it is very much an expression of collaboration. And so I think, bad leaders are people who try to control others and get them to do things rather than enrolling them and inspiring them to participate in a purpose greater than, perhaps a transactional outcome.
What if the thing, because like let's talk about like sales and business. If say your product is gonna be absolutely transformational, what you've got to sell or persuade someone into is gonna completely change their life. Do you believe that you've got an absolute obligation to say whatever you need to say to be able to get them into this or to enroll them into the decision?
That's a loaded question, because I think you asked that. Have you done Nail It and Scale It?
Yeah.
You have. Okay, so you've probably heard me talk about this before, but the audience perhaps hasn't. So I view what I do when it comes to my participation in a selling environment or a sales environment as almost like I have the cure for cancer. Now, I say that with a level of caution because I know there are probably many people out there who have either been directly or indirectly affected by the C word. I've been touched by it. I have family, friends who've been touched by it. So I certainly mean no disrespect to those people who've been through that journey. But one of the things that I know is when you know someone or you love someone or you have someone in your orbit that you care deeply about who is affected by a condition that you can fix. Like if your mum had cancer. And
she has, actually.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry, mate.
She's good. She's good.
So, okay, very practical example. So your mum has cancer. I'm really sorry to hear that.
She has in the past, just to clarify.
Oh,
so
had. Past
tense. So she's gone through. She had a double vasectomy. She had the wild, she went through the wild ride.
Okay.
But she's been good for, long time now. So I think she listens to these. So, Mum, we love you.
Hey, Mum. So let's say there's someone that you care deeply about and they are affected by a condition that you have a cure for. And that condition that they have is terminal. Is there anything that you wouldn't do to get them to take the cure? And this is the way that I view what I do. Because I have been exposed to many aspects of business. I've been exposed to the upsides of business when people succeed, but I've also been exposed to the downsides of businesses where people fail. And when people fail, entire systems are affected, and when I say systems, family systems are affected, health systems are affected. And so when a business fails, a business never fails in isolation of impact that is far reaching beyond just one person. There's always a systemic impact. And so with what I do, I almost, you could say, sell in one ways an insurance policy against failure, and in other ways, a hedge that increases the probability of success significantly. And I'll go back to a story where I ran an event in Sydney at the Masonic Centre in Sydney. And I think at this point I was my 13th city in my tour. I was doing a full day event. I think it was called the Peak Performance Profit Systems at the time. And at the end of the event, I do my pitch, I do my sell, and then normally I go to the back of the room and I'd have a lineup of people who would, come up and ask me questions, and then one by one I'd go through, I guess you could say, like a mini sales process. And there was this one guy who'd waited to the very, very, very end, and it was like 7 o'clock at night. I was fucking exhausted. I'd been on the road at this point for about 6 weeks, and I just wanted to go home. I was tired. And he came up to me and said, I really love the presentation. I'd really love to do the training. I've just been made redundant. I've just been giving a payout, and I've just started a business. I'd really love to do your training, but what I think I should do is I think I should just go and do it myself for a little bit, 6 to 12 months. And then once I kind of get a few runs under my belt, then I'll come and do some training with you. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say that. And so I've got the rebuttal for that. I know how to handle that objection.
How do you handle that objection?
Morgan, if you were going to run a marathon, would you start training 6 months after the day it starts?
No.
Or would you train in advance of that marathon to ensure that not only you can complete that marathon, but you can complete that marathon without injuring yourself? Because there's a level of conditioning that's required. There's a level of experience that's required. There's a level of progression that's required to get you to the point where you can run a marathon. Business is no different. And so you telling me that you want to wait 6 to 12 months before you train doesn't really make a lot of sense to me based on what I've just explained. So what do you think is the right thing to do? Do you think you should wait 6 to 12 months, or do you think you should probably start training last week?
I should probably start training last week.
And so that's usually my rebuttal, usually a lot more elegant than that. But at this time of day, at this time of night, I just couldn't be fucked.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, fuck, I don't want to have to try and convince someone else to do the right thing here, you know. I've got the cure for financial cancer, and again, that context will come more clear as I explain this story. But I basically just shut it down and said, all right, mate, you sounds like you know what you're doing. Shook his hand, best of luck. And I can't remember exactly how long after, but I think it was a period of maybe 18 months, maybe more. I get a message on Facebook, and this guy sends me this message, and it was a big, long message. And I remember starting reading this message and going, oh my God, this is horrific. You know, he had lost his business. His business had failed. He'd lost all his money. He'd lost his house. His wife had left him, and his wife now wasn't letting him see his kids. And so I remember thinking at the time, oh my God, this is horrific. But he had started the email with saying, I'm not sure if you remember me, but I met you at the Peak Performance Profit Systems at the Masonic Center. And so I went to his profile and I looked at a few photos, and I remember, and I'm not good with names at the best of times, but when it comes to faces, I'm really, really good with faces. And I remember looking at a few of his photos and going, oh, I remember this guy now, bald head, glasses, very memorable dude. And I remember thinking, oh. And then he finished the email or the message by saying, I remember at the time I said to you that I wanted to go and, you know, get a few runs under my belt before I started to train. I now realize that was a mistake. I really need your help, but I have no money. Can you help me? And as I read that message, I actually started to cry. And the crying turned into sobbing. And then the sobbing turned into this realization of, oh my God, I completely let this guy down. It wasn't his fault that he didn't do the training. It was my fault because I couldn't be bothered to essentially use what was within my toolbox to influence and persuade him to do the thing that he knew he should have done, but at the time had some level of resistance or fear or whatever the blockage or obstacle or resistance was. And I remember thinking, fuck, if I just made the effort, I could have potentially saved that family. I could have potentially saved that entire outcome. And it was at that point I kind of made a decision that I was never going to let anyone off the hook ever again.
Yeah.
If I knew I could help someone, then I was going to use whatever was within my moral and ethical toolbox, and I would deploy it in the orbit of my moral and ethical toolbox to ensure that I did everything that I possibly could to make sure that they took the cure that I had for them.
What's the name of that Japanese guy again?
Masaru Emoto.
Masaru Emoto. So this guy's crazy, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but so what this guy did was he had like a glass of water, right? And he put
so he'd get a glass bottle of water. He would sticky tape a word to it, or he'd play it music for 24 hours. He would then pour that bottle of water into 50 different petri dishes, and then he'd put those petri dishes on a rack and put them in a freezer at minus 51 degrees. And then after they'd all frozen, he'd pull them out of the freezer at minus 51 degrees, and then he'd put it into a freezer at minus 5. And then as those petri dishes thawed from minus 51 to minus 5, they fractured. They would fracture and crystallize. And then he would take photographs of them under a blue field microscope. And then he would essentially cherry pick. And this is where, you know, there's a fine line between science and research. And he was more of a researcher than he was as a scientist because, you know, when you look at from a scientific validation perspective, you know, it's important that there's a consistency in the outcome. Whereas what he would do is he would cherry pick the best looking crystals and he would use those in his work and in those examples. But what was incredible was the consistency of beauty that was contained in the crystals that were related to, you know, positive words. And he essentially was one of the first pioneers in the area of research to identify that water had the capacity to retain information and had a memory.
That's freaking wild. I've also seen other studies of people doing it with rice. Three jars of rice, yelling at one every single day, like saying like, I hate you, fuck off, blah, blah, blah. And then one being neutral and then one pouring love into it.
Well, mate, I think every person at home should do this with their kids or even just do this for a functional exercise. Boil some rice, put it in 2 jars. On one jar, label it hate. On the other jar, label it love. Put them at both different ends of the kitchen, and every morning when you wake up, go and fucking unload all the things that you're angry about, all the things that you hate to the hate jar, and then, you know, go back to the other jar when you've got all your hate, tell it how much you love it, you know, all the loving words you can possibly give it, and then just watch what happens over time. Because over time we see that the hate rice starts to go moldy, and stuff, gets disgusting. You can see this online on YouTube, and the love rice maintains its whiteness.
It's wild.
And we see this with plants. You know, there are many examples of where, you know, teachers will bring in 2 plants, and one plant all the kids will say nice things to it, and the other plant the kids will say the mean things to it. And the plant that they say mean things to, it grows really slow. It becomes sick. It gets yellow leaves. In many cases, it will die. And the plant that they say nice things to, it flourishes. It's like humans.
Yeah. So on the topic of leadership then, and all of these things, so how can we actually improve our skill set as a leader? So what are the best things I guess you can give these guys for how do we actually improve ourselves? Because when I look at leadership, I'm thinking business, but also in post, like for our own life. Like I have a program called Advanced Leadership. People sometimes think they come there to learn how to become better like corporate leaders, and what we do is tear them apart for 4 days and put them back together. So how can we actually improve our leadership skills in business and in life?
Big question. If we were to break it down, the first thing would be that we have to develop a level of self-awareness to become aware of how we're showing up. Because as parents, oftentimes, when there's a problem with the child, the parents will blame the child. I've got a number of friends who work in early childhood development, Dr. Shafali, Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. And what's really interesting is, when those parents bring their kids into work with Shafali or with Lapointe, it's really interesting because oftentimes the parents will come and go, oh, my kid's broken. And then what the early childhood development therapist will do is they'll work, in most cases, they won't do anything with the child.
They'll improve the parent, right? Yeah.
Well, they won't improve the parent. They'll work on the parent to help the parent become aware of the behaviors in the environment that is producing the behaviors in the child. Because one of the biggest mistakes that we make when it comes to working with kids is we diagnose the kid. We don't diagnose the environment. And if we look at any form of behavioral development, and whether it's a child, and a child is nothing more than, an employee. It's a dog. It's a horse. It is a member of a pack. It's a member of a herd. And so, if we're looking at leadership in the context of business, whether that be entrepreneurial or startup or corporate world, oftentimes leaders will look at the behaviors of the team and they'll think the problem is the team. It's not the team. It's the environment. And the person who controls that environment, who has the most impact on that environment, in most cases, is the leader or the parent. And so I think one of the things we need to get better at doing as leaders is when we have a problem with the team, let's stop trying to diagnose the individuals and start looking at the bigger picture, which is the environment. And in order to do that in a really high-functioning way, there is a requirement for self-awareness to be present. Because when we understand that all my child is doing, all my team is doing right now is expressing something within its environment that is not working, and if I am the person who is in control of this environment, then it's something that I'm doing, something I'm not doing, something that I'm bringing to this situation either psychologically, energetically, or verbally, behaviorally. There are so many things. And so it requires, in order to be a good leader, there's a level of self-awareness that's required to be able to look at oneself and self-audit and be aware of the energy that we bring to an environment, first and foremost. Cesar Millan is a great example. When he works with a dog, he says, I don't train dogs. He says, I rehabilitate dogs and I train humans. And the fundamentals of what Pat Pirelli, another great example, he doesn't train horses. He rehabilitates horses and he trains the owners. He's a horseman, horse whisperer. And, there's just not we've got dog whisperers, we've got horse whisperers. We need some fucking human whisperers. Because the fundamentals are the same. Horse, a mammal. Dog, a mammal. Human, a mammal. And mammals, evolutionary, have developed these incredibly highly sensitive central nervous systems that have the capabilities and the potentiality to pick up on non-verbal, non-physical, non-verbal, energetic information in its environment. Like you have this web of fibers that go through your entire body. You are like a walking, talking aerial. But your aerial isn't like a stick. Your aerial is like a fibrous network that is contained within meat. You're a meat sack that is basically this giant transceiver. And so because our central nervous systems are so sensitive, because we're mammals, we pick up on the energy of our environment. That's actually one of our systems of evolution. We've learned how to sense our environment to avoid danger. We've learned how to sense our environment to find food. We've learned how to sense our environment to secure safety and to nurture. And so as leaders, it's important to understand that you are constantly transmitting information and you're constantly receiving information. If you have a very low level of self-awareness, you're going to be completely oblivious to what you're transmitting out there. And that's what we see with dogs, with horses, with humans, as we see owners, we see parents we see leaders who look at the individuals, who look at the pets, who look at the animal, who look at the human. And I think the problem is with the human. We'll put all that human, that pet, that animal is doing is expressing what it's picking up in the environment. And so if we're transmitting dysfunctional information, you could be saying all the right things, you could be doing all the right things, but if you're transmitting information that on some level is dysfunctional because you're suppressing emotion, or because you're suppressing behaviors, or because you're, essentially thinking one thing but saying something else, mate, the people in the environment are going to pick that up.
So is what you're saying, so incongruent communication?
Well, I think self-awareness is key, because once we can become self-aware, we can start to bring presence to the leadership role. And being present in the leadership role is about being present of self first, not being present of others, not being aware of others. That's secondary. Being aware of self first. And when we're aware of self, we can show up more honestly, more authentically, and then we can communicate more honestly. We can communicate more authentically. Because level 1 would be that level, the self-awareness, but level 2 would be, and self-awareness, essentially brings into the realm the potential for all the non-verbal, non-physical behaviors, which is what is the energy that you're bringing to the environment as a leader. And so once we've got a level of self-awareness and we're bringing an energy which is conscious, which is present to the environment, then we can work on the on the more verbal and the more physical, because step 1 is non-verbal, non-physical. We spoke energy before we spoke English or Chinese or whatever your first language was. We are primed to pick up and receive energetic information from the environment as a basis of communication. And leaders are constantly communicating energy. So we need a level of self-awareness around the energy that we bring to the environment, and then we need to be aware, secondarily, not just of the energy we bring to the environment, but the physical actions that we bring to the environment. What are the visible behaviors that we're bringing to the environment? What are the, we'll call it visible, auditorily visible words that we're bringing to the environment? Because just like a plant responds to the words that you give it, so does a child, so does an animal, a mammal, a horse, a human. And so once we understand ourselves, once we understand the energy, then we start to understand the behaviors and the words that we bring to the situation also have huge implications as well. So at this point in the game, you probably start to think, fucking hell, this is a little bit complicated. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But it's what we're doing constantly, but most people aren't aware of what they're bringing to the situation. Now, some people just fucking nail it, and they're, unconsciously good at this shit.
Yeah.
And in most cases, these are people who have grown up in very healthy, very functional dynamics, environments, maybe large family units. There's lots of interactions, very healthy, very functional, but most of us haven't. I know for myself, I didn't grow up in that environment, so I've had to learn all this stuff.
Yeah. So I heard that, so you spent some time over in Ukraine, training with Ukrainian forces.
Ukrainian Special Forces.
Yeah, so you trained with the Ukrainian Special Forces for quite some time. Some gnarly things have happened over there, and you even had a gun put at your head. You're held at gunpoint by a terrorist. Talk to us about what was happening there, and what did you learn about stress and leadership?
Well, firstly, it wasn't terrorist. It was the Ukrainian counterterrorism unit of the military. And I'll try and give as little background as possible to get to the punchline, which is the answer to the question. I was in Ukraine. I've got a mate of mine, Ray Mancini, incredible human being. He does a lot of special weapons and tactics training all over the world with everything from SWAT, police, special forces. His specialty is teaching close quarter combat. And because he's a mate and a client, he invited me to go over to Ukraine and do some training, which was amazing. So I spent 14 days in Ukraine and doing special weapons and tactics training every single day. So working with short arms, long arms, basically percussive training. So there was no running, there was no climbing, there was no, grueling resilience training. It was just lots of percussive weapons that made very loud noises. And we started off with very basic sequences of deployment. And then by the 14th day, we were executing very complex, sequences of performance, from clearing kill houses, hostage situations, carjacking scenarios. But day one, it was just pulling a gun out of a holster, pointing it at a target and pulling the trigger. And so over time, we built up a whole range of integrating complex processes, which we built upon every single day, but combining that with incredibly a high stress stimulus. Because one of the things that happens when a gun goes off or a bomb goes off or a percussive weapon deploys, there's a very loud noise, incredibly loud noise. And unless you have trained to be able to adapt to that type of environment, the moment you hear a noise at that level of frequency, it activates your sympathetic nervous system instantly. So you're autonomically triggered massively, which means
this is the fight or flight?
Massive levels of fight or flight. So your adrenaline surges, your perception narrows, you go from being able to see everything to only being able to see, pinholes in front of you. But then the more you condition yourself through exposure to the percussive weapons whilst training process, the more you are able to adapt to the situation to where, you could be in the middle of a gunfight and someone throws a grenade and it goes off and it doesn't bother you. But it takes a level of conditioning to get to that point. And that's what the training is all about. It's about developing a level of resilience whilst learning process to be able to maintain a level of composure in incredibly high stress, incredibly high stakes situations, whilst also executing complex processes. And so it wasn't just done for shits and giggles, although it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of shits, it was a lot of giggles. It was done specifically for me to learn how to manage high stress, high stakes, and execute complex process.
So they're increasing the stress with each scenario, or they're increasing the complexity of what you're doing while maintaining a level of stress?
Both. And that is much like business, because business sometimes feels like they're being shot at. Sometimes it feels like there's bombs going off. Sometimes we feel like we're at war. And if we are not able to adapt and condition ourselves through exposure to maintain clear thought and composure to be able to execute, which in some cases in business can be complex processes, we'll fall apart. And if you do become stressed and you do become activated, you lose intelligence, because as autonomic stress goes up, IQ goes down. And so the goal is to condition ourselves so autonomic stress goes up, but IQ is not affected. And we can maintain composure, but also maintain intelligence at the same time. So I was having an absolute blast. I was loving this. I was completely in my element. I love, I guess you could say I'm third generation military on both sides of my family. Air Force on one side, Army on the other. But I was never in armed forces myself. And so I kind of felt like I missed out a little bit. So this was me catching up, genetically speaking. And then it was the 4th of July, 2016, 2017. I think it was day 10 of the training. And the ironic thing was that day of day 10, we did the AK-47 orientation. So up until that point, we'd been using AR-14s, Glock 19s. And then on day 10, I was like, right, now we're going to teach you and orientate you with AK-47. So here's an AK-47. Let's pull it apart. Let's put it back together again. Okay, let's load it. Let's fire it. Okay, let's jam it. Let's clear it. Let's use it and integrate it with a short weapon. Let's use it in a tactical scenario. So, kill house, hostage scenario, carjacking scenario. And so we got to learn how to use and play with the AK-47, which was brilliant. But that day was actually one of the instructor's birthdays. And being the very loving, kind, nurturing, generous person I am, I was like, oh, God, I'd really love, as a way of saying thank you, I'd love to take everybody out to dinner. Now there's, how many was it? There's 12 people. And so everyone's like, oh, that'd be amazing. Half the guys don't even speak English. And when we went out to dinner, we're all in tactical gear. So minus the holsters and everything else, we're all basically wearing tactical gear. So we look like fucking mercenaries.
Yeah.
And everyone bar me is, looks like a meathead. Well, I look like a meathead, but everyone bar me look like a mercenary. So they're tatted up, they're muscled up, they're mean looking dudes. And so we go walking around Kiev. We're in Kiev at the time. We find this restaurant on the top of this hill in a castle. And it was absolutely stunning, Morgan. Like, probably one of the most beautiful restaurants I've ever seen in my life. We walk into this castle. It's a 13th century castle or whatever it was. The floors were covered in perspex glass. And underneath the floors, it was lit up with lights because it had all these relics and 13th century items like plates and bones and everything, all lit up. So it was basically like this museum underneath this restaurant. So it was absolutely stunning. And we walk into the restaurant and we say, listen, we'd love to be able to get a meal. And they're like, oh, our restaurant's completely booked, but you can use our private dining room. I'm like, fantastic. So we go into the private dining room, and it's basically this giant table up against the wall, and there's 5 chairs down each side. And the listeners probably won't be able to see this. So there's a wall in here, and there's this giant table. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seats each side, and 2 seats at the top. And then up here, there's 2 massive, huge doors, swinging doors, going into the private dining room. And so there was a couple of SAS boys, British SAS. We had one British SAS was sitting here. I was sitting here. And one of the lead instructors, whose birthday it was sitting over here. So anyway, we sit down, we're drinking fucking Ukrainian vodka or whatever it is, and they drink over there. Like, they really know how to drink. So we're getting into it, eating incredible food. Now, I'll just rewind for a second. When I said to my team, and when I said to because I was married at the time, I'm going to Ukraine, everyone's like, are you fucking serious? Because it was only 2 years earlier? I think it was 2 or 3 years earlier when Crimea had been annexed from... So Russia invaded part of Ukraine back in 2011?
Right.
And they annexed Crimea, and they basically took over Crimea. And there was a massive revolution in Kiev. So there was fighting, there was bombs, it was huge. And there's a great documentary on this. It's called Winter on Fire. It's the whole documentary of the revolution in Kiev, in Ukraine, when Russia invaded, and then there was this whole shit show in Kiev. There were still bullet holes in buildings when I was there, and some buildings were still closed down. And so people are like, are you fucking crazy? Like, you sure you want to go to Kiev? Like, because that's where all the action was. That's where the upheaval was. And I was like, yeah, of course I want to go. And my wife at the time was like, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm like, look, what's the worst that can fucking happen? I'm going to be with the Ukrainian Special Forces. Like, what could possibly go wrong?
Good group to be with there.
Yeah. And they're like, yeah, okay, that's fine. I didn't even, but the one thing I didn't do is I didn't take Matthias, my filmmaker at the time, with me, because I was like, you know what? I'm happy to take responsibility for my own life here, but I'm not happy to take responsibility for his. And so I left him at home, which was a mistake. And I go. And then the day I arrive, I get to the hotel. And my hotel was the epicenter of where everything went down in 2014 or 2011, whatever it was, in the revolution. It wasn't the revolution. What was it called? It was something. And literally, as soon as I arrive, within about 20 minutes, there's sirens and there's all sorts of things going on. And I didn't actually hear it, but 20 minutes after I arrived at the hotel, there was a car bombing, like 400 meters up the road. And so I was like, they came in and said, all right, everyone, the police, army, etc., were there, making sure everyone's safe. And, we didn't have our interpreter there at the time. And so a few hours later, we found out, there was a car bombing a few hundred meters up the road. And so me and one of the instructors said, well, let's have a look. We'll go for a walk up. So we walked up the road to where the car bombing was. The car was completely fucking annihilated. But there was this build-up of people. Like, it was almost like, and it was seething. I was like, oh my God, here we go. It's going to be a riot. And so we get back to the hotel, and then we start, through our connections, trying to piece together what happened. And it turns out that there was an assassination. And the guy who was assassinated was the head of intelligence for Special Forces.
Wow.
And it was at that point that I went, fucking hell. If they're willing to target this guy, maybe we're not completely out of reach after all. And so I didn't think anything of it. Got into the training, did all the training. Day 10, it's one of the guys' birthdays. We take him up to this castle. We walk into this private dining room. We're sitting down. We're having a great old time, like just enjoying ourselves. And then literally out of nowhere, we're sitting there, and then all of a sudden, both these doors get completely kicked in. So these doors are kicked in, and they're opened wide. And 6 guys file in, head to toe, wearing camo and bandanas, carrying AK-47s. So 3 guys funnel in this way, and 3 guys funnel in this way, like a total clearance. Both these guys here, this guy got pushed flat on the table. This guy here got hooked in the head, pulled back, laid out flat on the floor, and there's a dude stomped on top of his chest, and they're holding an AK in his face, and they're screaming. I'm here. I stand up. As soon as I stand up, I stand up with my hands up, and I get knife-handed in the throat, and I'm thrown against the wall here. This guy here right beside me decides he wants to fucking argue with the guys with the gun. And so I'm telling him to just fucking relax, calm down, chill out. I'm up against a wall here with an AK-47 bearing in my face. Now, my first instincts were, oh, this is a fucking joke. We're being punked.
Thought they were setting you up, eh?
Well, I thought it's Ray's birthday. You know, Ray's got, you know, some pretty interesting friends and some pretty interesting places. And I was like, this is a fucking piss take. And so I've got this dude, you know, he's 6 foot whatever, head to toe camo. I'll show you some photos of the dudes. We snuck some photos afterwards.
You took selfies with the guys with guns.
Didn't take selfies. We just okay, so there's the dudes.
Let's see this.
So you can scroll left or right.
Fucking hell. These are the guys that came in.
Yeah. And so I'm up against the wall. I've got this AK in my face. I'm looking at this guy in the eyes.
They're all balaclavaed up.
All balaclavaed up. Mean as fuck. Like, they look legit. They don't look like they're weekend warriors.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, we're being punked. You know, this is a G up for Ray's birthday. And so I start smiling. And I'm like, oh, this is a fucking piss take. And then the dude who's got the AK in my face, he sees me smile and he gets fucking mad. Like, mad. So he starts screaming at me and he's like, everything's in fucking Ukrainian, can't understand a fucking word. So I'm sitting there with this stupid smile on my face, a fucking AK-47 in my face, in his hands. And I'm looking around the room and I can see 3 fucking dudes with AKs over there. You know, the dude beside me has got an AK in his face. He's about to get muzzled. And there's another guy at the front of the room here who's got his foot on top of the chest of the SAS boy. And by the way, the SAS boy was 6'2" and easily 140 kilos of muscle. He was massive. But he was on the floor, bloodied, and a gun in his face. And I'm thinking, oh, they've really taken this quite far. And so I remember going back to, because that day we did AK-47 orientation. And so I remember just having a little peek down the side and going, oh, fuck, the safety's off. That's a bit odd, if this is a bit of a G-up. And then I looked at his hand, I was like, fuck, he's got the trigger on the finger. So the finger on the trigger. And I was like, fuck, this is legit. This is fucking real. And I remember that my smile turned to excitement. And this is where I'm, you know, people say to me, even Ray, the guy at the train, he's like, came in, you're fucking broken. Because I remember thinking at the time, holy shit, this is real. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm so calm. And I'm looking around the room, and it wasn't like one of those surreal moments. I remember looking at her and going, man, I'm chill. Like, I'm totally chill. And then within a moment, another dude came rolling in with a shirt tied around his head and a video camera in his hand. And he just starts filming everybody. And as he filmed around the room, you could see he kind of took a moment, he took back and he just screened something in Ukraine. And then as fast as they came in, they fucking left. Because they realized,
wrong group.
We've got the wrong group.
What's up, Dream Nation? Have you ever wondered how far ahead your life would have already been if you had got access to this type of content at a younger age? Look, this is why I need your help. I'm trying to build the #1 personal development platform out there to teach you guys the tips, tricks, and attitude of what it takes to live your dream life, and to bring the type of education that we all wish we had in school. This show only grows by word of mouth and new subscribers, so it would mean the world to me if you could smash that subscribe button right now, leave us a 5-star written review, or drop a comment below and share this episode with a friend. I would be forever grateful. All right, now let's get back into this episode.
And they run out, the doors literally go, everybody gets up, SAS boy wipes the blood from his face, we sit down and we all just break into laughter. Like, we're just laughing, and then we just start eating and drinking. And we just carry on. Like, literally within 10 seconds, we're just laughing, carrying on. And then we hear this screaming, yelling. It was like there's a fucking stampede in the room outside. And so I just turned around. I said, should we fucking go and see what's going on out there? And everyone's like, oh, yeah, we should probably go and see what's going on. This is because that's a bit weird, right? And so we all get up, we file out. The whole restaurant is completely cleared. Like, no one's in the restaurant. Chairs are tossed over. Tables are tossed over. And so we're like, what the fuck? And so we go walking up the top. And that's where you see those photos. Because as soon as we got to the top, I saw all these dudes. I'm like, I can just pull out my camera. I was like, and I started taking as many photos as I possibly could. And anyway, through our guys, talking to their guys, we found out that they'd had a tip-off that the guys who were responsible for the car bombing were in the restaurant. And so...
and were they?
Well, yeah, if you see
So
some of these
they
photos,
were the people who they pulled out of the restaurant.
yeah, in some of those photos, you can actually see some dudes being barreled into. Where is it?
Well, so these guys,
these guys here are being barreled into the car.
Wow.
And so they basically zip tie them, like literally like a fucking movie. They pull them out, zip tied them, throw them in 4 separate vehicles. One will pull up, zip, 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 put them in, door shut. Next one pull up. So 4 vans.
And they assassinated the head of intelligence for the people you were with. Is that
was
correct?
It was believed that they were the guys responsible. And so we kind of worked out.
Did anything get back to it? Like, why the fuck were these guys coming after you next, or was that a thing, or no?
Didn't know. Didn't
get anywhere.
I didn't find out any more information.
better left just not knowing that one.
But we found out that the one of the intelligence guys had come into the restaurant because they'd had the tip off, and all the counter-terrorism squad were outside ready to go, and they came to surveil the restaurant, and they walked up to the maitre d', and the guy apparently was looking around the restaurant. He goes, "Oh, do you have any suspicious-looking people in the restaurant?"
All the people upstairs.
He goes, "Well, I've got 12 fucking mercenary-looking dudes in the fucking private dining room." And so they came and bailed it. Didn't even give us a free fucking meal out of this, I should say. We had to pay everything, full freight. But I remember, because it all went down, we went back into the restaurant, we sat down, and I just was so excited. And even the Ukrainian boys were just like, no, they're looking at me and they're smiling, but they're looking at me and shaking their head like, dude, there's something not quite right with you. And by day 10, they knew I wasn't quite right because, I was training harder than almost, because there was a few other private military guys there. I was the only civilian there, but I was training harder than anybody. Because we'd do dry fire exercises for 2 to 3 hours a day, and then we'd do live fire exercises for about 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
And then they'd call it. But, we did the dry fire exercises, then we'd do the live fire exercises, and then while everyone else was, up in the mess having lunch, I'd be back downstairs doing dry fire exercise. I was just training over and over, like grueling. Like I lost 7 kilos while I was there. I just burnt and burnt and burnt and burnt and burnt. So they kind of already knew.
So what did you like? So that's pretty gnarly, right? So I want people to kind of like, how can they? From my understanding of what I got from that is the fact of you guys training for so long, those intense training sessions under stress, over and over and over, gets to the point when you are in a wild situation and you're able to be calm. And if it was to actually escalate, you'd probably have more intelligence to even defend yourself and to handle it than the average person. So how can we as average people, because this is stress conditioning, right? This is why I actually love skydiving. And
that's exactly why I did skydiving. It was a form of exposure therapy for me.
Yeah, because if you can think back to when you did your AF, but the first session, I remember sitting, because I just did it at the start of this year, you sit in the tin shed for 8 hours and they show you pictures of all the ways you can die skydiving. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to skydive anymore. The fun sort of went for it with me, yeah? And the next day we did our first jump solo, and it was horrible, petrifying. But all they make you do is jump out. All you need to do is find the chute. That's it. 3 times, find it.
And there's one dude either side holding you,
yep,
making sure you're
holding
stable.
You. And then you do that successful. The next one, you think you have to do it again, but then you have to, like a slight extra move. Then the third one.
Progressive.
Just more and more and more and more and more. And then by the 10th jump, I jump out solo, I backflip out the plane. I'm like, this is fucking wild.
Yeah.
And it just becomes this sort of second nature. And I can now gauge my ability to handle stress when I'm 15,000 feet about to jump out, and I can feel my nervous system being like, I'm good, I'm calm, and I practice my breathing and actually focus on regulating underneath that insane stress, because if I can do it there, exiting an airplane, I can probably also do it while I'm handling complaints or whatever.
Well, mate, when I started skydiving because I thought it would be fun, but then I started to realize when I brought my problems up to jump, and I jumped out, and I get down, my problems were insignificant. And so I got to the point where I realized there's this very strong therapeutic link between, in many ways, a skydive is like an ice bath, but like a really, really, really intense ice bath, because it creates this incredible level of hormetic stress that when you get down, once that, you stretch, and then when you get down, there's this level of calm and relaxation, because you just, I'm safe, but it's just this extra layer of. And so I got to the point where my last, God, it would have been 30, 40 jumps, I was wearing a heart rate monitor and I was meditating in free fall.
No way.
Just to learn how to create even greater levels of composure. But because, it's exactly the same. And so to create some practicality of this, because not everybody's going to want to necessarily jump out of a plane nor go and train or be able to go and train with the Special Forces. I think a lot of people would probably love to do that. But one of the things I've learned is the importance of understanding progressive development. And progressive development, when it comes to developing conditioning, is the same whether you're trying to, create fitness conditioning or strength conditioning or, any form of conditioning requires to do it functionally and not break yourself, either mentally, physically, psychologically, or emotionally. The more we can start with the basics and gradually add to the plate, we get to the point where we can put a huge amount on our plate and it does not bother us whatsoever.
Yeah.
But if you go from a blank plate to a full plate, you're going to create trauma.
Mm-hmm. I really think, I've heard that you've read thousands of books, you've done a heap of work as well. And somebody asked me the other day, if you were to just recommend one book, what would it be? And I'm like, it would be the book I would write, and it would only be one page. And the one page would talk about how to actually increase our self-esteem. Because I really believe that the underlying problem of all humans, the reason we don't have the success we want, the relationships we want, everything is a self-esteem thing. Because if we truly believe that we're worth this, then we'd go and get it. I think we really bring to us the things that we are in harmonious vibration with, the thing that we actually think we're worth of having. And what I really learned through skydiving is the very thing that actually builds more self-worth is doing the things that are fucking hard. Because you said the feeling you get when you land on the ground, I've unpacked this all. I'm like, this is exactly what it is. This is how I've got myself to the place I'm in my life now, because of I can look myself in the mirror and go, I'm really proud of the guy I'm becoming. Because I continually do things that are just fucking hard. I do things that are uncomfortable. So when I first did the skydiving, I was like, this is hard, really fucking hard. And I go through the process of doing a small moment of extreme courage, call it, extreme step into this really sucks. But very quickly what follows is the level of pride to go, I can't believe I did that. Like 5 minutes ago, I was so scared. Now I've come to the other side and I'm so excited. And this now is what I teach so many people to do, is to actually, the thing that we're most afraid of, that is the thing we've got to lean into, because on the other side of that is going to lay a higher level of self-esteem. I think the reason most people have low self-esteem these days, especially at the younger generation, is because they shy away from doing hard fucking things. They take the easy road out of the comfort zone. This is why 95% of people, they do the uncomfortable things and they wake up one day and they go, why don't I have this self-belief? It's because every single time you told yourself, I'm going to start working out now, I'm going to wake up at 5 o'clock now, you don't do it. And then it creates this more evidence in our brain to be like, well, why are you going to build $1 million business because you can't even get up at fucking 5 o'clock when you said you could get up at 5 o'clock? Have you realized that as well?
Look, I think self-esteem is one of those really interesting boxes that when you unpack it, it can be different for, people based on a whole range of different scenarios. But if you look at if we just look at doing hard things to develop, a level of confidence, because I think, most self-esteem can be corrected by finding a progressive way to develop confidence. And I think the challenge that most people have is they try and do things that are way, 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 way too hard based on their level of confidence where they start. And so that's where, the word that I threw out there before that I don't want anyone to miss, and I hope you didn't miss it, is the importance of progression. Mm-hmm. We've got to understand that building confidence is progressive. Building strength is progressive. Building intelligence is progressive. Building a life is progressive. Building success is progressive. Building a successful enterprise is progressive. Becoming a great leader is progressive. Everything by virtue of bits of information that are required to be downloaded in different situations, contexts, and times and scenarios over time create programs. But we've got to download lots of those bits first. And so I think, if we were to really simplify self-esteem, doing hard things is a really important component. I don't want to really get into necessarily trying to psychoanalyze or judge every generation, because every generation has its own set of strengths and it has its own set of weaknesses. Like I was just reading recently how this generation of schoolies are, going to bed early and doing pamper parties and, well, I don't know, maybe you saw something different because you're on the Gold Coast.
I haven't seen any different.
And so, we're progressing, things are changing, and things aren't always changing for the worse. Sometimes they're just being different, and sometimes we judge things that are different as being worse than or different. But it's just, or worse than or bad, but it's just essentially different. But I don't think anyone can go wrong when it comes to developing or having a progressive level or a plan of developing progressive confidence through the act of doing hard things. And as I said before, it doesn't have to be a skydive. It doesn't have to be, training with special forces. It can be as simple as an ice bath. It can be as simple as a sauna. It can be as simple as doing something that is really hard, but rather than trying to eat the whole fucking thing, just start with one bite at a time and build up.
That's why nearly every single year, and I'll probably do it again this year, in January 1, I'll create a video and I say, don't set big goals this year. Because I see so many people create massive goals and then they're nowhere in 2 weeks because it's so big and they're like, they don't have the confidence to even do it. Because what I'd rather is what you're talking about is to set more so instead of goals, more targets and tasks. And how can you actually start to build the foundation of doing the things? If the goal is to drop 50 kilos this year, it shouldn't be to drop 50 kilos. It should just be, I'm going to hit the gym once a day. I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week. That's the goal. That the byproduct of doing the goal and actually developing the habit will eventually get us the result.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's exactly what I did this year when I got back into training. I only really started to be able to train after my last health episode earlier this year. And when I started training with my trainer, I've got this incredible trainer over here, Joseph Robinson, absolute phenomenal human being. So I need a goal. I need a goal. I need something to aim towards that I want to do by the end of the year. And he goes, well, why don't we just make the goal consistency? Let's just train. Let's just not miss a training session no matter what. And that became, I guess you could say the overarching goal. And I'm ticking boxes.
Mate, looking buff.
Well, I'm healthy, mate. That's the main thing. I'm healthy. I'm happy. Yeah.
Yeah. You talk about, a lot of your content is actually about parenting. Because it's funny because you're a business coach.
Yep.
But you know a lot about a lot of things. So you talk a lot about parenting. You know a lot about human psychology, behavioral psychology, all these sorts of things. What is it that you wish most parents knew when it comes to psychology and early development in children?
If you don't work out your shit, then your kids are going to have to do it for you.
How so? How does it translate?
As parents, all the stuff that we choose not to address and confront within our own psychology, within our own system, will ultimately be passed down to the next generation, and then it'll be up to them to have to solve your problems. And by your problems, I mean yours, your mums, your dads, your grandmas, your grandpas, your great. There's a lot of work now coming through around understanding epigenetics' role in ancestral trauma and ancestral issues. And so what we're now learning is a lot of the issues that we have are, in most cases, or in some cases, I'll say some because not necessarily most, in some cases are hereditary at an epigenetics level. So we in many cases are passing down our issues through our genes. And as parents, we have the capacity, because genes aren't, just because we have a gene doesn't mean it's active. Because, when we look at a gene is nothing more than a switch. And the environment will determine whether that switch gets turned on or turned off. And so it's pretty fair to say that, most of the problems that we have as parents, when we give birth to our children, they're going to be passed down on some level. But it's up to us to create an environment where those genes are either going to get switched on or switched off. And so that's where, the reason I talk about a lot of different things is because I'm interested in a lot of different things. But I don't talk about anything that I don't have any necessarily direct experience with. I talk about parenting a lot is because I spend a lot of time as a parent, consciously working as a parent, and researching and studying and trying to work out how do I become a better parent. And so if there's one piece of advice that I would pass down to parents, is for them to understand, if you don't work on you, all the shit that you have is going to be have to be worked on by them.
Yeah.
And so if you want to be a great parent, do your work. And when we look at the role of a parent, or we look at the role of a child in a paternal, maternal environment, parents, again, it's the same as working with an animal, any mammal, whether it be a horse, or a puppy. what the puppy will do, or what the child will do, is often behave in a way that produces tension in the parent. And if the parent can't resolve that tension will amplify whatever that behavior is. And so our role as parents is to learn that when our children do things that trigger us, our job is not to counsel the child and make the child different. Our role is to resolve whatever emotion is coming up within us to the point where it no longer exists. And so that behavior no longer triggers that response in us. And what most people will find is when you can resolve the emotional response to the particular behavior that you're seeing, you'll stop seeing the behavior. Because then the child has no reason to present that opportunity for you to feel.
I'm yet to come across one day when I have kids. This will all be helpful for me,
mate. One day. Well, here's the thing, and I don't think it's a one day thing at all. It's an everyday thing, because if you're teaching leadership, then you need to know this shit inside out. Because parenting is nothing more than a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week.
Personal development event.
Well, leadership. It's being a parent is being a leader with no off button. Because you can't just decide, well, I'm not going to be a leader today. Because if you decide that, then there's going to be ramifications and there's going to be consequences of that. And I think, one of the reasons we see, certain behaviors coming through as and by the way, every generation has its own set of fucking issues. And in most cases, those issues have been passed down, from one generation to the next. They just get expressed in different ways. Yeah. And so I think as parents, as entrepreneurs, the better we can become as a parent, the better we become as an entrepreneur, the better we become as a leader, the better we become as just a human being. Yeah.
I saw you say one time that essentially, and I may be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but essentially insecure children can be created essentially by parents yelling at them while they're having a meltdown, so they're not processing information properly. Can you explain that?
So when a child has a meltdown, it's a few important things we need to understand. One of the things that distinguish us between other mammals is we have these two incredible frontal lobes that enable us to fuck up the planet and ourselves, because we have the ability to critically think and analyze and overthink and overanalyze and, have a desire that goes beyond just instinctive needs. And so being human, those frontal lobes enable us to be able to think, rationalize, but also manage emotions and, be better and be stupider at the same time. It's a mix. But those frontal lobes don't fully develop until the age of around 28. And, when you're dealing with kids who have frontal lobes that are completely underdeveloped, they don't know how to think. They don't know how to rationalize. They don't know how to be sensible, because they're a fucking kid. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean that in a context. Because oftentimes, as a lot of parents expect a lot from a brain that isn't fully developed. They expect a brain that isn't fully developed to behave like a brain that is fully developed. And that's just not fair. It's not fair on the kids. And so when a child has a high threshold emotional response, those frontal lobes, regardless of how developed or undeveloped they are, become completely disconnected from the rest of the brain. In early development terms, it's called flipping your lid, because all of a sudden you no longer have contact with the rational part of you. Have you got cousins or friends with kids? Have you ever seen a child have a meltdown?
Yeah.
You can't negotiate.
My nephew.
Yeah, so you can almost not negotiate with them, right? They can't hear you. You can't talk to them because their brains aren't connecting. They're not able to function properly. And so
this is where most parents just yell.
A child has a meltdown. How does that make you feel when you see your nephew have a meltdown?
I just awkwardly sit there. Someone go do something.
If it's your child and your child has a meltdown, most parents feel shame. They feel guilt. They feel embarrassment. They feel fucking angry. How dare you behave in this way? Don't you know there are kids, whatever the fucking story is, there's kids in Africa that are, so much worse off than you. And so when a child goes into meltdown, oftentimes a parent's response is shame, guilt, anger, control, manipulation, aggression, because they don't like that expression. So they want to control it. They want to dominate it. They want to manipulate the situation to make the child stop. And all the child is doing in that state, whether it is rational or not, is completely irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. What it's important to understand is when a child is in a meltdown, they are literally in a physiology and a psychology of no or lack of safety. They feel completely unsafe. That is why their body has gone into meltdown. And so oftentimes our response in order to, work with that, as I said, control, aggression, domination. But what's interesting is context, because, that very same parent who would behave with aggression, domination, control, whatever, if their best friend showed up on their doorstep and you hear this knock, 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 and you open the door and their best friend, who's an adult, is having a complete meltdown and crying, sobbing, crying uncontrollably, I don't know many parents that would sit there and yell at that person and dominate that person, or aggressively try and manipulate that person, or grab them by the arm, or send that adult to their room. You wouldn't. What would you do?
Have a conversation.
Well, mate, I'd go probably a little step further. You'd probably go, oh, fuck, come here. You'd hold them. Oh, mate, it's okay. It's okay. I've got you. Because again, how are you going to talk to an adult who's having a fucking meltdown? You can't. You have to soothe them. You have to help them regulate. And so when a child goes into meltdown, they're just demonstrating that physiologically and psychologically something has happened. What happened is irrelevant. But what you need to understand is their body right now is in a fight or flight scenario. Their body and their brain does not feel safe. Whether you think it's fucking rational or not is totally irrelevant. What that child needs right now is it needs a calm, supportive, secure, and safe environment to reset its nervous system. And the sooner we can provide comfort, the sooner we can provide safety, the sooner we can provide connection, the sooner that nervous system is going to balance out and regulate itself. But if you're but you could be holding a child but still angry yourself. You could be holding that child and still the child is feeling all that.
Yeah, I feel it.
And so our goal when we comfort a child would be the same goal we have when we comfort a team member. Because if you have a team member that's melting down, you're not going to scream at them, you're not going to yell at them, you're not going to dominate them, you're not going to manipulate them. Although some leaders will try, because they don't like how they feel when someone else is expressing an emotion.
You have ADHD. You talk about that a lot. What I'm curious to know is, you got ADHD. You've created massive success, which is an extremely common thing we've seen across, I think, like most successful entrepreneurs have ADHD, dyslexia as well. I'm the same, so high five for that one. But how have you learned, how do you actually harness it? Because I've been talking about it a lot lately. I've never actually been tested, but I've had said multiple times on the podcast, I would bet my bank account that I 100 million % have ADHD. And I don't really have an interest in getting tested at all, but what I have an interest in knowing...
What makes you think you have ADHD?
Well, the fact I have 20,000 things that I want to do at once, and I can, as I'm sitting here right now, can never actually sit still. But the thing, as I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking about the 14 other things I'm going to do today, what we're going to do with this content, also at the same time as you're talking. Then I'm like, fuck, what are we talking? And then what am I talking next? And the brain is just hop, 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 hop around to all these things all the time. And me and my girlfriend joke about this a lot lately because we're starting to learn more about it. And we're like, that's fucking me. I do that shit. I'll go around the house. I'll start filling up a glass of water here. Realize I got to do something else. It'll trigger a memory. They'll stop that, go do something else. And then she'll come home and she's like, what is all this stuff? I'm like, oh, well, I started doing that at 10 o'clock. I started doing that at 12 o'clock. And it's just always little things like that. So lately, how it's been playing on my mind is going, because I love it because I can hyper focus like a psychopath and get so much done and do multiple things all at the same time, and I love it. But sometimes where I find it challenging is things like that. Leaky energy, and I've got all this energy that I could probably harness if I could direct it well. So the question is, how have you learned how to sort of contain that and actually focus it and use it to your advantage?
Okay, I want to answer this a little differently than what I normally would.
Yeah.
And maybe this is just based on my own progressive nature. Let's take the label ADHD out of it.
Yeah.
And let's look at the answer to the question. What makes you think you have ADHD? You just listed a whole bunch of behaviors that you're aware of.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the more you become aware of these behaviors, do you work out how to work with these behaviors?
I'm starting to. Okay. One thing I've learned...
when did you start to become aware of these behaviors?
Probably the last 18 months.
Okay, so it's new. How old are you?
It's definitely not new. It's more I'm now aware going...
That's the new part. How old are you?
30.
Okay, so you're 30. you've had these behaviors probably most of your life.
Yeah.
But you've only become aware of these behaviors in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
So you're learning how to ride a bike.
Yeah.
And so this is where the challenge I have with labels, because I've been given ADHD, dyslexia, ASD, PTSD, CPTSD, OCD.
Got the whole alphabet.
Mate, I've got a fucking book of acronyms. And, you know, we can get lost in the acronyms, which I think can be very dangerous because most of these labels are classified as deficits. They're not classified in balance. As here are the deficits, but here are also the benefits. And so people tend to pay attention to the things that they get told that are associated with the label. And most of the things associated with most labels are negative. And so then they go, now I've got a reason for being fucked. Now I've got a reason for being disorganized. Now I've got a reason for being late. And that to me is just such a completely dysfunctional way of approaching self-development. To me, the foundation of self-development is self-awareness. You know, and I think it's amazing, Morgan, that you've become aware in the last 18 months of these behaviors, but you're so early. 18 months is not a long time. You know, I in many ways, I guess you could say I was lucky because I got labeled early and I got curious early. And rather than me getting lost in the curiosity of, okay, what does ADHD mean? What does dyslexia mean? What does PTSD mean? And what are all the bad things associated? I was like, who am I? Well, okay, this is a really interesting behavior. How do I manage that behavior? Or how do I use that behavior in a way that is going to be more beneficial or direct my energy in the right ways? And so I started to learn, okay, I've got a very busy mind. Oh, okay. It's not really helpful, you know, because I find I can lose myself in conversations, and rather than listening to what you're saying, I'm maybe going to think about what I want to say next or what I'm going to ask you next. That doesn't help me stay connected. So what can I do to calm my really busy mind? Well, fuck, I can meditate. Okay, so what do? I meditate every single day. You know, 30 minutes to 2, sometimes 3 hours a day, I'll meditate. Every morning I wake up, straight into meditation. My mind starts to relax. Sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's better. And it's often associated with, okay, what are the level of mindfulness practices that I'm engaging with every single day? And the more mindful I am, the less issues I have with a busy mind. The more mindful I am and the more I stay with. And so I've also noticed with my OCD, I have intrusive thoughts that sometimes, you know, come in and fucking terrorize me. I hate it because they say horrible things, do horrible things. Oh, but it's my ego. Yes, it is my ego, but they're still very intrusive. Oh, so when I've noticed that I have these intrusive thoughts. Oh, what's a good antidote to that? So when I have these intrusive thoughts, one of the things that I've learned how to do, I've learned how to connect with my body. Okay, what am I feeling right now? Oh, mind. No. What's going on in my body? Okay, where am I feeling right now? What can I feel? Where is there sensation in my body? I'm just going to breathe into that sensation for a while. I'm just going to stay in that sensation for a while. Okay, maybe it looks a little bit awkward to Morgan because right now he wants to interview me, but you know what? I'm just going to sit here and, okay, now I can carry on. And so now I find I've got a way to calm a busy mind, and I've got a way to regulate intrusive thoughts. But I'm always late. You saw that this morning. I'm always late. You know, I'm very focused when I'm focused, but fuck, I can focus on 20,000 things at once. So you know what I need to do? I need to learn how to use a fucking calendar. I need to learn how to go, hey Siri, can you please set a reminder for 12:35 that I have to call Morgan?
Okay, I've added I have to call Morgan.
Oh,
this
so
afternoon at 12:35.
I have this incredible tool that I walk around with my hand every time that can enable me to recall all the things that I remember that I need to do that oftentimes I'll remember for a split second, but then I don't remember it until 2 days later.
Yeah. Well, so, yeah.
And so, and the list goes on. I structure, I segment my days, I plan, I use planning as a way to maintain focus on the things that I'm really interested in, because otherwise, you know, I get distracted by the things that I'm not interested in. Before I know it, I've spent 4 hours on Instagram fucking scrolling in a hole, you know? And so to me, I would really love it if we moved away from labels, although I know they're helpful because they create this relationship. And, you know, being ADHD, we read about successful people with ADHD and we go, oh, I've got ADHD. And I know as a budding entrepreneur, we're often looking for points of relativity. We're looking for points of normalcy. We're looking for points of reference to go, oh, well, if he can do it, so can I, which is great. But I think we've got to get to that point where we move away from the label and we move towards greater self-awareness. And not self-awareness for purely the pursuit of understanding self-awareness with a level of curiosity. Go, oh, okay, I'm aware of this part of myself. I'm aware of the negative aspects. I'm aware of the positive aspects. How can I manage that better? What could I do to support myself with a busy mind? What could I do to support myself with intrusive thoughts? What can I do to better support myself with my addictive behavior? Because I know, as being ADHD, I'm very super prone to addiction. I'm literally like a walking magnet, just waiting to become addicted to anything. So what do? Well, then I have to learn how to manage compulsion. I have to learn that when I feel a compulsion, that I should feel the compulsion rather than act on the compulsion. And so rather than getting identified with the labels, I get really curious within myself, and I start to really embody my own understanding of self and look for ways that I can really utilize that in helpful ways.
I love that. And I guess that's why I've never, and I'm glad, my parents never got us tested or anything like that as well. Because I think if I think back to in school, the idea with anyone with ADHD was literally like, oh, that person's special. It was literally, there was that sort of label. And I think that I like the idea that a lot of people are sort of talking about it these days in a different kind of context, but I was never interested in the label or anything like that. But now
can you imagine if we could fucking label animals with the conditions that we have?
Yeah, right.
How easy would it be for a dog owner to go, oh, my dog, why is your dog fucking nuts? It's got ADHD. But we don't do that, do we? Because if the dog sits there chasing its tail or barking or chewing shit up, we just go, oh, it's just it's a dog that just misbehaves. It was never trained. Well, no, it's a dog that is literally just expressing what's going on in its environment. It's not giving anywhere near enough time to play, because what do dogs need in order to really be healthy? They need to exercise, they need to run, they need to burn up all their energy. And by the way, that's how you train a dog. You exercise them to the point of total exhaustion, and then you train them. Because it's a lot easier to train a dog that is tired than it is to train a dog that is full of beans, because a dog that's full of beans is going to be disobedient. And we look at it, but then you take that context and you bring it into kids. Most kids, I would go as far as say, don't actually have ADHD. They're just not playing enough. They're not exercising enough. They're not expressing and getting enough, because kids have enormous fucking warehouses of energy, but in most cases they're stuck in a room for 6 hours a day and told to look at a fucking board or to fill things out in a paper. They're not meant to do that. They're meant to be running. They're meant to be jumping. They're meant to be socializing. And I think most of the issues that we're seeing with kids right now are nothing more than human things being looked at through, industrial lenses.
Yeah. Do you know Dan DePenny? Have you heard of that guy?
No.
He's like a monk. He's big a while ago, and he's kind of disappeared for a while. He's got those 3 paint.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. One of the things he talks about is he's like the biggest problem is like people aren't distracted. They've just never actually been taught how to focus. Oh,
mate, you just struck something big. And this is why I love Montessori and Steiner. My son did Montessori for the first 7 years. He now does Steiner. It's a school system. It is, I guess you could say, it is not mainstream, although it has had to adapt to certain mainstream industrialized processes. Montessori is beautiful. When you look at Maria Montessori, she was well ahead of her time. If you look at Dan Pink's work, if you read any of Dan Pink's work, Motivation, The Surprising Truth, Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Really Motivates Us, it's basically an 80-year composition and compilation of looking at how motivation is developed. And what they discovered was that we teach kids how to become distracted, because we force them to do things that they're not interested in. So they constantly, their brains as a default to dealing with things that are boring, that they don't understand, they make things up in their mind and they learn how to distract themselves. In Montessori, and I'll make this really simple, oftentimes, when you enter into the Montessori system, the children learn, or they don't even learn. The foundation of Montessori is becoming self-led, self-learned, self-managed, and self-directed.
Wow.
And so when you come into a Montessori environment as a child, the children have all these different stations. And every day they can go, okay, the teacher go, okay, so what station do you want to start with today? And so the kids go, well, I choose to do this. And it might be fucking counting beads. And so they go and get the tray with all the beads and they bring it over. And then you get to see them sorting beads. And they will sort beads for like fucking 45 minutes at the age of 5 and 6. 45 minutes. To the point where they're like, oh, yeah, I'm done. All right, what station do you want to do now? I want to do this station. I want to match cards. So they'll go and get the cards. They'll bring the tray over. And then they'll just play with that for 45 minutes and they'll match cards. Now, what's amazing is these kids naturally learn through self-interest how to develop an attention span.
Yeah.
Which essentially is the foundation for learning, is knowing how to pay. Because attention, to me, this is where people make a mistake. It's a skill. And like any skill, you have to learn how to pay attention. We are not born knowing how to pay attention. We have to develop an attention span. And an attention span is developed by focusing on things progressively more and more and more over time. Now, I try and get my son to do something he's not interested in. Man, he looks like and presents what would be classical ADHD. But mate, I give him a Dogman book. He's gone for an hour and a half, and he's reading Dogman for an hour and a half. Okay, or if we're playing with trucks, mate, he's playing with trucks for an hour and a half, or whatever the activity might be. But the moment you try and shoehorn him into something he's not interested in, he's gone.
Well, I guess I love that, and I guess that's the problem with the education system at the moment. Have you seen that meme where it's like there's like a judge sitting here, and it's looking at a penguin, a monkey, an elephant, and a goldfish in a bowl, and it says, "Okay, guys, today we're going to do a test, and I'm going to score you on your ability to climb that tree. Go." And it's like, this is the education system, and it's so accurate, because if I can look back to every single report card I've ever had, and my parents would probably attest this, it says the exact same thing. Morgan's got a lot of potential. He just gets distracted a lot. He doesn't pay attention. And I used to get kicked out all the time. And I did work on this a few years ago, and my healer said to me, she's like, "Do you ever feel like you've been misunderstood?" And I'm like, actually, fucking yeah. I was always labeled as like a bad kid, but I was like, I wasn't actually bad. I was just always fucking distracted and bored. But put me in sport, or put me in music, or something where I could create, and I'd be there all day. And that's all I wanted to do, was create shit and do things and entertain. And that's what I do now.
No, that is the basis of our schooling system. It's completely backward.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you're engaged in, Montessori or Steiner. And, I think right now in the US, homeschooling, you should see the charts for homeschooling right now. It's
gone massive.
Huge. Oh, it's huge.
It's because they're trying to convince everybody.
Well, I think for a whole range.
Shit.
I think it's that way for a whole range of reasons. Because a lot of parents were quite nervous, around a lot of things that have happened in the last few years.
Yeah.
And I think the schooling system, for the most part, is teaching things that are completely non-functional. It's not a functional learning system. We're learning things that they don't need. They're learning things that they don't need to know how to use. And then in most cases, and you might go, "Oh, this is a progressive school. They're using computers." Oh my fucking god! Like, don't get me wrong. I think technology is certainly helpful, but when you start to understand the implications of blue light, when you start to understand the implications of non-native EMF, especially in the quantities that are around devices that are plugged into a wall, you start to realize that, there is some, again, you can start pointing to a range of different labels that the medical system would hang on kids, and they can be traced back to, in most cases, things that are happening within the body that are a cascade of, being exposed to non-native frequencies.
Yeah.
Everything we've got here.
Yeah. Okay, Money. This has been fun. This has been good. Where can everybody find you on social media? You've got your podcast rocking again now.
Mate,
so
we've got the podcast back up, Unstoppable, on Spotify, YouTube, everywhere else, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, X. I don't even like to say X, formerly Twitter. It's just X. All right,
bizarre,
it's so much better now. And I got to say, I love X. I really do love X. I've fallen a lot more in love with X since Elon has bought it, and it's literally become probably one of the only platforms on the planet where free speech is actually legitimate, and that it's not censored, and it's not full of bots that are trying to push a perspective or propaganda.
Yeah.
So
beautiful. Final question to wrap this up. We'll see what you say this time. But if you were to go back to your 18-year-old self from your perspective now, what's 30 seconds of advice you'd give him?
Don't eat yellow snow. I think I may have used that one already.
Definitely.
I think the best piece of advice I could give my 18-year-old self is just, it's all going to be okay. Just trust. And the sooner you can trust yourself, the sooner you'll realize that everything's going to be okay.